Hola, hola, everybody. It's Dr. J Flow. I wanted to let you know that we are doing an audience survey because we want to learn more about you, who you are, what you like, and what you would like to see in future episodes. So I ask you to please help us make this podcast better by answering a short survey. You can find the link in the show notes, and it will take less than 5 minutes, I promise. As a token of appreciation, you'll have the opportunity to enter into a raffle for a $20 gift card. That's it. Here's the episode.
I felt super disconnected, but I also was like, wait, I can't just not claim this part of me just because I don't feel like it's enough of what everybody else expects.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Taylor Tieman, an attorney and small business owner whose journey to become a lawyer helped her understand the decisions her family had to make to keep them safe. And she's here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Taylor Tieman, welcome to Latinx Can.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited about all the information that you have to share with our listeners, but also about your story. I think is a very interesting one. Let's start by talking about your story and where your story begins.
Yeah. So I'm an attorney now, but I know it feels like it's been forever, but it's been five or 6 years now. I went to college on the East Coast in Philadelphia, and I played softball for my college. And that was a change for me because I grew up in California. So I went all the way to Philly, really far away from home. And that was a really good time. I had a lot of fun there and really kind of honed in on what it was I wanted to do, which was continue my path to being an attorney. I kind of knew before college that I had inklings of wanting to do that. But the major that I majored in, which is communications, allowed me to really work on my writing skills and persuasive writing specifically. So that aligned pretty nicely with law school. There's a lot of writing and reading involved.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in there that you just mentioned. So let's dive a little deeper into a few of those areas. So you mentioned you grew up in California. So tell me a little bit about your family and, growing up in the, I think it's close to LA or the LA area, right?
Yeah. I grew up in the South Bay area, which is, I guess you can call it a suburb. I don't really actually know what the definition of a suburb is, but I think it's a suburb outside of Los Angeles. We're in LA, but it's about 20, 30 minutes from downtown. I grew up there my whole life. My dad's side has been here for a while. My mom's side is from different parts of Mexico. So, I grew up in the South Bay in pretty nice, affluent areas. My parents worked really hard to make sure that they wanted to raise us in areas where we were going to have a good path to go to school. My mom was really on top of not wanting us to get in trouble or anything like that. So they worked really hard to make sure that, we were on the right path for what they could do, and then kind of just left it to us to figure it out from there.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, growing up, how much of your mom's Mexican culture was part of your upbringing?
Great question. I didn't really even realize how much my family on my mom's side had. The best way to put it is, and I asked my grandma this interestingly enough when I was in law school, why don't we speak Spanish? I'm not fluent. I understand it pretty well. My mom can speak Spanish. My grandma could speak Spanish, but it kind of stopped there. And I never even realized, because we lived in areas where it wasn't like mainly Spanish speaking. So I didn't realize that we had kind of like lost that. I took a really interesting class in law school about race and the law. And we started really diving into, and I did a project on, a paper on the laws that basically discriminated against everyone, but I really honed in on specifically trying to hone in on like the Mexican culture and the laws that impacted why it was basically like subdued in certain areas. So I had really cool conversations with my grandma, and she basically was like, we experienced so much discrimination. She lived in Texas that she kind of just did what she could to fit in and have, the kids fit in. So there was a lot of things culturally that like I knew were Mexican. We still did a lot of like really typical things. Like we celebrate Christmas on the day that like Mexicans celebrate it and not like on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
So all of that and like all of the food, of course. But a lot of not a lot, but like the Spanish is a big one, I think, that I didn't realize until I was older and like making a lot more friends that did speak Spanish. I was like, why don't we speak Spanish? So yeah, the culture and we are definitely doing a lot now. And like, I'm trying to help bring that back in because it is a different time now, but like for my grandma, she had like terrible experiences and just was, conditioned.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was obviously I grew up and I've spoken Spanish my whole life, right? But coming here and then meeting people who were of Mexican descent, especially in Texas, that didn't speak Spanish, at the beginning I was like, well, like, why wouldn't you, right? And I would take it perhaps the wrong way as well, because I'd be like, well, why are you ashamed of that part? So much of culture comes with language as well. It's not the only thing, but so much of it comes with language. But I didn't understand the context behind it, right? All the discrimination that the earlier generations suffer, and that it's their way of surviving. It was their way of surviving, right? And so it was assimilation at a time where that's all they could count on.
Yeah, it's it's crazy the things that I didn't even ever think to like ask her because we didn't even talk about it, because she also, that was so difficult for her that she didn't want to like put that on us. But, when I started asking her, she was like, yeah, it was really, really difficult to deal with. My grandma's side, they moved from Texas to Bakersfield, California, and there still was a lot of discrimination there, but I don't think as bad as it was in Texas. But then my grandma moved to Los Angeles and was just basically trying to like make it for herself, and found that was the best way to kind of avoid a lot of issues. I think my mom was telling me a story one time about how like she used to bring, like all of the other kids would bring like sandwiches with regular bread, and like my mom would have sandwiches with like tortillas, and all the kids were like, what are you eating? And she was so embarrassed. But like I didn't even I don't remember dealing with things like that, because at the point that I was in grade school and middle school, I fortunately was in areas that were pretty mixed. So I didn't see it, but I also am fairly like, I'm not super light complected, but I can pass for things that aren't, and so exploring that whole like identity and all of my upbringing and my mom's upbringing has been really, really interesting. And that's been we're still all learning, but it's a process.
Yeah. And it's good that, sometimes it's hard to see progress, especially in the times that we're living right now, but at least it's not okay for people to just tell you that you can't speak other languages than English. And people will do it. They still do it. I think obviously much less than in those times for your grandma. But what's nice is that other people don't support it fully anymore either, right? So it's like, if that happens, if somebody else is likely to step in and say, what are you doing? Like, this is not okay.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories of families where they just don't speak Spanish, and the kids have pretty exact stories to mine of like their parents just didn't want them to have to go through what they went through. So at the time I was like, okay, now that I'd figured out why we don't speak it, like, yeah, I'm really embarrassed that I can't speak it, because you can't, it's like, okay, well, I am, I'm half Mexican. How do I not speak Spanish? And then you meet a whole other group of people that they went through the exact same thing.
Hmm.
It's a it's a
Yeah.
toss up. It's interesting.
It is. It is very interesting. But so tell me also about growing up playing baseball, right? I think the intention was for you to eventually get into a really good school, and maybe softball was a an avenue to do this. And I recently watched a couple of documentaries. There's the movie about Serena Williams and Venus Williams on HBO Max about her father, and the other one is the documentary on Colin Kaepernick. And so it gives us a little bit of like how much it takes from parents and families, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I tried a couple sports when I was younger, but softball was the one that I liked the most, I think, because at the time it was the least amount of like running. But I also I'm pretty tall. I'm 5'10". So I think it would have been a shame to not play a sport with that size as a girl. So I just stuck with softball. I really liked softball. At a certain age, I liked pitching. I wanted to be a pitcher. And you'd have a huge advantage being tall if you're a pitcher, let alone just being an athlete in general for softball. So my mom really saw that I was, good enough that I could play in the travel leagues and the travel ball. It's separate from like high school. And it's a little bit when you're taking it more seriously and you really want to kind of advance competitively. And so she she drove me to like all my games and she would go to all my tournaments and stuff with me. And she kind of started to see that like I might be able to get into college with this because parents are talking about it. Older girls' families are dealing with it and they're trying to get their kids into school. So my mom kind of saw that avenue and immediately jumped on it and was like, all right, this girl's like tall enough, hopefully athletic enough, good enough that we're going to try our best to get her into college so that we can get her into the best school possible. Because college is super competitive and I didn't have the best like academic grades. So I think we were really jumping on softball. But yeah, my mom spent a lot of time driving me back and forth to games. She at the time was no longer working, which gave her and myself and my family an advantage that she could have the time to take me to like lessons. My dad continued working. He wasn't really the one driving back and forth because, they had made their arrangements, like who was gonna take care of kids at the time and who was going to work.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of the things that I thought of. And we were talking a little bit about this the other day in that I had a similar upbringing because I did gymnastics when I was back in Venezuela and I did it for 10 years, started when I was 5. So much of elementary school and even high school was me doing gymnastics. And I was always aware of the time commitment and the effort that it would take for myself, right? But at the same time, it's interesting when I look at this because for me, that was also an avenue to go into college. And it's weird because I would see the competitions, the NCAA competitions for gymnastics on TV, and I'd be like, I'll make it there. And I was like so naive, of how much it actually takes to ever make it there. But in contrast, I was telling you, like at home, at some point, I made it in my state. I made it to a certain level that we became the representatives of the state in every competition or meets that we had. And the state would cover the traveling and the accommodations and all of those things. But now I learn more about how it's not very accessible, that path for many people, and contrary to what I thought.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that goes into it as far as time and financial investment if you want to play a sport. There's some sports that I think the recruitment process for college is a little bit easier, like maybe directly from the high school. So if you're playing for your high school, they're paying for your transportation, they're paying like for uniforms and stuff. But if you play travel or club ball here, which you usually need at that point because that's where the coaches are recruiting from. I mean, that's not included for anybody. Like that's separate payments. Like that's a whole nother like different lifestyle. You got to be ready to buy uniforms, buy equipment. So it's a major investment. And I think that I had heard things about the Williams sisters documentary. I don't know if it's in it, but I think I had heard that they like go through all of the like how like expensive it is, especially, paying for like equipment. And you don't even know if your kid's going to be like great yet.
Yeah.
It's a major investment.
Yeah, it really is. But that definitely was a pathway for you to get into a really good school, right? So you were recruited by the University of Pennsylvania and became a student athlete. And I don't know how many people grow up thinking that they want to become student athletes. And like I was saying, I know I had that dream. I didn't know how I was going to get there. And certainly I didn't know what that meant to be a student athlete, right?
Yeah.
So what was it like for you to be a student athlete? What kind of support did you have? And what impact did it have on your academic life?
I mean, they tell you ahead of time and it's a lot of work, but I think I really underestimated the amount of time and practice that goes into it. Because I mean, prepping to get recruited, you're obviously like practicing and getting lessons and playing on the weekends, but you're now in college practicing like in season almost every day for several hours. And it's a lot of time. And they do a really good job of, if you need like academic support, they have tutors that you can request. I remember like, I think it was mandatory study hall.
Yeah.
They would have us go to, because we are spending so much time practicing and playing and even missing class sometimes for games. And that to me, like, I knew it was going to be a lot. I was going to do poli-sci as my major, and it was just too much work and too much reading. Ironically, going to law school, calling something too much reading, but it was way too much reading for me at the time when I was trying to practice. So I was able to kind of maneuver and figure out a new major that I actually liked much better. And going into law school, pretty much any major works out. But yeah, I think it's a lot of dedication. The coaches are available, to help you. At the school I was at, I think the school they don't put less importance on athletics, but we're not like a D1, like a Texas or like a Cal or a USC, where the athletes are like doing everything is sports related. The school did a really good job for us they actually mandate like certain practice hours that we can't do because they want us to be working on academics. It's still a lot of time. But we did have some, I remember having like a sports psychologist available at certain times, which was really great. But yeah, it's a lot of time.
Yeah, I remember it being really, really intense. I think I went in doing chemical engineering, at least for my first semester. And I do remember, because I came into UF because of my academics and not because of my diving career previous to that, because nobody really knew. I was a walk-on. I think that's what we said. People call it. I just showed up one day and say, "Hey, I can dive off the 10-meter tower. Will you have me?" And they're like, "Sure, why not? Let's see." Now I realize how ridiculous I sound, right? Just showing up and telling people I can jump off the 10-meter tower, and nobody knew me at the time. They didn't even know my name, right? So, but anyway, so the story I was going to tell is that they paired me with the advisor for the swimmer and divers, right? The swimming and diving team, the academic advisor. And I go in there and I said, well, I'm going to take Chem 2 and Calc 1, and I'm also going to take French and the Chem lab, which was 3 hours every week, right? And they're like, "Girl, you're crazy. I don't think you're going to be able to do that." And I was like, "I don't care about you. The academics are my priority, and I'm just going to do it." And I went and did it for the first week. And then I came back and I was like, "No, please drop it. Drop calc. I'm not going to be able to make this. I can't do this."
I remember girls on my team now I'm like, most of my teammates are either like doctors or lawyers, or they do really crazy impressive stuff. I remember everybody was doing like biochem something. I don't even know what it's called. It's really intense because everybody wanted to go to med school. And like our coach would have talks with everybody and be like, "Look, your time commitment to the sport is a lot. So like take that into consideration when you're planning for your classes." Obviously, like the academics are a huge deal. But the reason we had a lot of people just like come in and like leave the team immediately because they realized how much work it was. I came in with 8 girls my freshman year, and I think we finished with 4 of that class. And that was pretty similar the years following, just because the academics and the sport is a lot.
Yeah. But you also mentioned that it really helped you create a community and feel welcome.
Yeah, I mean, you immediately have like friends because they're your teammates, and you kind of have to get along with them, even if you don't like to I mean, I had all my teammates were awesome. I mean, you know kind of people's names going into it, and they have specific like meetings for athletes ahead of time, and it's you kind of know that everybody's going through the same thing. So it was nice to know, like, okay, I do have some people that I don't, have to like be awkward and make brand new friends with these people, because they're going to have to hang out with me regardless. So yeah, that was good. That was fun.
Yeah. And even like for me, it wasn't like a team sport, right? We didn't depend on each other when we were diving off the board, but it was nice because they would try to create this atmosphere of like, we are all a team. And I think that makes it, the fact that, for example, for NCAA, it's not like you have individual people who win, but it's either the team, the school wins or not, is sort of like what helped it be this cohesive environment in which we are all here to just help each other.
And you're there practicing with those people for like hours. So they become like almost family. I mean, I'm still very close with like one of my teammates who also was a pitcher, and like she was at my wedding, like super close. So, you spend a lot. I spent more time with my teammates than I did with any like classmates or anything. So, and I also moved super far. So I only saw my family like once or twice a year. So having those people around was awesome.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier that you knew pretty young, even before going to college, that you wanted to become a lawyer. And after you graduated with your bachelor's, you started your Juris Doctor degree at Southwestern University School of Law. And as I understand, this is a very diverse school. And up until that time in your life, you had navigated mostly white spaces, maybe as a person who also can present as a white person. And you've been open about the fact that this was a time in your life when you realized your own privilege as a white presenting Latina. How did that manifest for you, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, I went to law school. I came back. I worked for about a year before law school, and then I came back to law school, went to Southwestern, and because I had that like team, like community experience at Penn, I was looking for something similar to jump into at Southwestern. So I took a look at like the different clubs and boards and stuff you could be on. And the Latino Law Student Association was something that really intrigued me, because I was like, oh, okay, I can hop into this. And so I joined my first year. I think I was like a representative for I also saw it as a cool opportunity because they had representatives that would be for each like section of the incoming like law school group. So I was like, okay, I not only can join this group, but I can be kind of like a liaison in the middle and meet other people. So that was really interesting to hop into. But hopping into that, I was surrounded by way more people of diverse backgrounds that I had been surrounded by even previously in undergrad and elementary and middle school. So I was like, okay, this is great. And that's when I kind of just see like oh wow, like we don't speak Spanish, and everybody around me can kind of like speak Spanish and is fluent, and different cultural differences. And I was like, okay, something really clicked of, all right, you grew up a lot differently than, your friends and these other people. Like, how has that impacted your upbringing and how you were raised? So, at that time, I like really wanted to hop into the race and the law class. And I was just really curious about like why my upbringing was different from others, and why, maybe we didn't do certain things, but we kind of like celebrated them without really being super like open or public about it. So yeah, it's an interesting like 3-year kind of journey into at least starting to dive into that. And I've even dealt with like my own like feeling like I'm not like one side or the other enough,
right?
Because you can pass as one thing, but then the other group doesn't think you're enough of the other thing. So that's even a whole identity kind of like crisis that started then. But I'm glad it like happened, and I'm glad that it allowed me to dig deeper, especially into like family history and like really learning about that and the reasons why these things happen.
Yeah. And that's really interesting what you're saying about, maybe it's like I've heard the phrase ni de aquí ni de allá, because it's like one group might accept you for something and another group doesn't. And, I mean, we do that as Latinx people as well, right? Like we say, oh, you don't speak Spanish, you're not really Latina. I mean, actually, this happened to me the last weekend where I was with this group of ladies scientists I didn't know, and one of them tells me, oh, my husband is from Puerto Rico. And I go, oh, my husband is from Puerto Rico, that's awesome. And he was the chef to make us dinner that night. So when he came in, I was like, oh, hi, hola, ¿cómo estás? And the guy's like, oh, hi, oh. And he responded in Spanish, but then he switched to English really quickly, right? I was like, oh, your wife tells me you're Puerto Rican. And he's like, well, kind of. Like, I actually was born in Detroit and I'm adopted. So, like, it's my mom is Puerto Rican, but I wasn't born in the island. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, this guy is now Puerto Rican, Can you talk more about that experience of like not being accepted by either group at some times?
Yeah. I mean, like my whole life, I knew that I was like, my mom's full Mexican. So I knew I'm half Mexican and then half like a bunch of other white things combined. So I just knew that. And we like when people ask, what are you? I'm like, I'm half Mexican and I am half white. But when you go to like, especially when I joined the Law Student Association, it's like, okay, people start asking like where your family's from. And I was like, okay, well, 3 generations ago, they're from Mexico, but they all know like exactly where their families are from. And I'm like, I don't know. My grandma doesn't really talk about that because she didn't, she like had been suffering so much like I believe like trauma and didn't want to talk about it with us. So I'm like, I don't know exactly where my family's from because we don't like go there also. Like we have been there like once in my whole lifetime. We don't go there frequently. So I felt super disconnected, but I also was like, wait, I can't just like not claim this part of me just because I don't feel like it's enough of what everybody else expects. So, I mean, I still deal with that a lot, like frequently, like when I tell people that I own a business. I technically am Latina owned, but people are like, wait, your last name, or like, you don't look like that. And I have to explain it over and over. So, I get that there's certain things that indicate or like flag for, it's very obvious for some people, or some people it's really not obvious because, if I go into a white space, if I say I'm Latina owned, I get no questions, or they don't ask where my family's from, but they're also like very not unsure, but they also don't really understand like the culture or anything like that. But when I go into another space, they're like, oh, where's your family from? And I'm like, okay, we just figured out that everybody's from Chihuahua and the other half's from Jalisco. And like, it's been a lot of learning and like doing my own kind of personal work of like, how do I deal with that? Not insecurity, but like the feeling like not one or the other. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm like, I can't choose a side because I'm half. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a song, I listened to it just because it popped and I put it on a playlist, but I don't really know. But she says, ni de aquí ni de allá. And then later on she says, no, de aquí y de allá. I'm both ways, I just have to find a way. I'm from both sides. It's not just one or the other. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I know that it's a beautiful culture. I just came back from Mexico City and I just fell in love with things, first of all, for the first time, because I had never been to Mexico besides this year, this like 2021, I guess was the first time in my life that I went to Mexico. But I was so amazed by the whole culture and our ancestors. And we visited the pyramids or the temples in Teotihuacan, just south of Mexico City. And I was amazed and I was like, how is everybody talking about the pyramids in Egypt and nobody's talking about these things? I was like, wow. I was so embarrassed because I learned about that by Googling what are things to do in Mexico City 5 days before going, know?
No, yeah, we're shooting. We were planning to go last year, but then with all the COVID stuff, we're like, okay, hold up. But we're planning to go back and hopefully going to bring, my family and be like, hey, this is all the stuff that we haven't been enjoying.
Awesome. It's going to be a great trip when you go. It was amazing. It really was.
I'm so excited.
And so since your experience in grad school, you've been intentional now to support aspiring Latinx lawyers and BIPOC lawyers by becoming a mentor for the Legal Education Access Pipeline. I think it's LEAP. the LEAP Fellowship. Tell us more about what LEAP is all about and your involvement with the organization.
Yeah, LEAP does a fantastic job. They create a fellowship for basically students that want to go to law school. So LEAP ideally helps students who are underrepresented in law school. So students of color, LGBTQ students, and they provide the fellowship program where we give, well, as a mentor, I'm not like 100% at every single meeting, but they have really great resources like law school counselors and how to fill out the application. LSAT prep. All of the prep you need to apply basically to get into law school, to position yourself in the best way possible. So I think they do an amazing job. I think it's like a 9-month. I've been doing it for 2 years. I think this is my 3rd year. I started with them when they started. Their attorney, their founder, who was also previously an attorney, found me like online somewhere. And we met in person and she was like, oh my gosh, will you do this? And I was like, yes, of course. But yeah, they pair the fellows with a law school mentor, somebody who's currently in law school. They pair them with an actual attorney, which I think is amazing because I didn't have any attorneys in my family. So asking around, like, what do you do? Or like, how do you like go about being a lawyer? Like all of those questions that you have when you're applying, there's not a lot of people to turn to and ask, especially looking at how low our representation numbers are in the legal field. Like, even if you did know somebody, it's like, I think we're at 4 or 5% of the legal field for Latinx individuals. So there's just not a lot of us, and there's not a lot of people to just like ask around. So putting them in an environment where you can just meet a lot of people and ask questions and then also get the support, it's awesome. They do a really good job.
That's amazing. And like, I guess at what stage in their career, I suppose if it's for help to apply to law school, then somewhere when they're doing their bachelor's is when they should try and reach out and try to get into the fellowship.
Yeah, I think they do applications in the fall or early fall or late summer. And I think our applicants usually hop in around like their final years of undergrad, or if somebody's taking a gap year, that's another good time, I think, to kind of get that process going. But yeah, I think they take applications in the early fall, and then they have a SoCal chapter, and then they also just opened up a NorCal chapter. And I think the goal is to kind of spread. But yeah, that's they're doing really cool stuff.
That's great. I think we'll if you can share the link for the organization, I can totally put it in the show notes so that people have access to it. And you mentioned this is maybe California specific, but there may be other things like that for other areas of the country.
Yeah, I think I've seen online there's similar type programs. I don't know their names off the top of my head, but it's like, in different areas. And I think it's more centralized to where the students are currently living. But even the students in the program, like the law schools, you're not limited to applying to like California, like they apply everywhere. It's just a matter of where they can locally get the support and the workshops.
And so after becoming an attorney, you practiced law with a law firm for a couple of years and then decided to start your own business, providing legal services to small business, or I guess small business owners and Latinx business owners and entrepreneurs. In your dual role as an attorney and as a small business owner, you have identified at least 5 top legal tips that entrepreneurs should follow, or that you recommend for entrepreneurs and small business owners. And I would like us to go through each one of them in the next minutes that we have, to just better understand why those are important to you and why you are recommending those pathways for these people. So let's start by the first tip, which is file for an appropriate business entity to avoid personal liability.
Yeah, business entities are the thing that are really going to legally separate your personal assets from your business assets. So depending on your business, what the course of it is, how much it's making, what you're doing, what the industry is, the timing will depend on a lot of those factors. But the thing that'll separate someone from being able to access your personal assets like bank accounts, car, home, any of that stuff is to separate the business legally from you as an individual. So that's where the entity is important.
And what do you mean by entity?
Informal entity for a business, there's several different options and they have different names in different states, but usually we're looking at for small business. So small business is something like an LLC, a limited liability company, or different types of professional service providers. You might have to look at like a professional corporation. There's different entities that your state has dictated are a formal business entity where they will legally separate it entirely from you as a person.
Okay, yeah. I guess I've heard of an LLC, and we also just recently went through the process of doing that for our podcast as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm going to say I was quite confused as to how to go through that process. But, and you said you don't have, like, you didn't have any attorneys in your family. We don't have any attorney friends besides you now. And so we're like, how do we go about this? And how do we do this? But actually the process was fairly easy, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot of just like random paperwork filed in different places. And because the laws are by state and even sometimes by like city, that's the only reason I think it's not better streamlined at this point where you could just like click something and it's done, or it's like super easy to find out. But usually the best bets are either, if it's affordable to have an attorney help you, or there's filing services that will help you kind of get a package together and figure out what you need. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different types of ways to have it done. But if you really truly have no idea how to do it, I would suggest at least like reaching out to somebody who is familiar with filing, that sort of thing, to help.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the second one would be seek to register the trademark for your business and brand name.
Yeah. So the name you pick for your business, it's really important to at first make sure that no one else has rights to that name or even is using that name, because the minute we are using a name, we have automatic rights in it. So we want to clear the name first legally and make sure that it's something that we can actually use. And then once we've cleared it, we can go ahead and protect it at either the state or federal level with trademark protection to ensure that we legally own the rights to that name. Because otherwise we don't actually own the name. We're just using it. But if we want to actually own it, that's the way to get registered ownership.
And what would happen if you don't register the name? Like, what are some complications that may arise?
Not registering the name, usually we run into either like an issue where if we didn't clear it and we actually find out somebody else owns something very similar to yours, and that's either causing a problem, or if that person actually comes after you and says like, hey, I actually have rights to the name, stop using it. Or if we get down the line and we figure out that we haven't registered it and somebody else actually registered it previously, and now we have to do a whole like dance around how to get that resolved. It just gets more expensive as the conflicts arise. So it's good to just clear it ahead of time. The only time I wouldn't say like hop into that like immediately, of at least educating yourself on like the clearance process, is if you're like starting a business and you're kind of poking around with a name, but you're not really sure about it yet. At the point that we are like, yes, I would like to proceed with this name, I am investing marketing dollars and my time and energy into this brand, that's the point where we should start kind of looking into the trademark process.
And is there maybe like a straightforward name to check if your name is available, if the name for the brand that you choose is available?
Yeah, we usually start with the trademark office, and it's uspto.gov, and they have a public register of all trademarks. So that's a good place to start. If there's, a red flag up there, we'll see it, and that'll give us a good idea of like, oh, maybe we can't use this name. That's not a full like comprehensive search though. So it's a good place to start. So if you see something concerning there, that's a good point to kind of figure out like, oh, is this a name can I use? Or is there something that's similar?
Excellent. Okay. Fantastic. Then the next one is register your original work or content for copyright protection.
Yeah. So this one comes up for business owners whenever they're creating I have some business owners that create like apparel and they have designs, or even they're artists and they create like either 3D, like tangible things, or they create like PDFs or guides that are downloadable, a lot of like educational content too. The way to protect those things, instead of looking at trademark, usually we're looking at copyright protections, because copyright law is what will help you protect your original content and creations. And again, it's a registration process, but that's the way that we can really start to protect those areas within the business that are not necessarily brand associated, but they're items that we're putting a lot of time and effort into. They're original, they're unique, and we want to make sure that other people can't just like take them and use them how they want to.
But then another thing that you mentioned, another tip, is monitor your protected material for infringement. How do you go about it? Especially if you're like a small business owner, you might not really have many resources.
Yeah. If you have protected material, there's bare minimum, some like due diligence we can be doing, like an occasional like social media search, an occasional like domain name search, just like Googling your name, or if there's like brands, brand associated like things that are related to your business. Like if you have a line of apparel, if you have a line of clothing or something that, people might be using. So there's ways you can like search online and kind of get a feel for it. But also, if you have something really popular and other people are using it or talking about it and it becomes like viral or really popular online, that's another good time to check in and be like, hey, do I have the things protected that I need protected? Because I know it's flattering to have people either like use your work as inspiration or take something of yours and like repost it or reshare it. But it's important to know like what the rights you have are so that you can monitor those and protect those, because if we let those get diluted, that can really hurt our own rights and what we've created. So it's important just to kind of be basically aware of like, okay, here's the, bare minimum rights I have here. Here's rights I have here. It's kind of just the education around it. Like if we want to run a business, we have to have basic knowledge of like accounting, basic knowledge of like negotiating and sales. Legal is just one of those things, like having a basic level, of it is necessary. And then if you want somebody else to help you, you can always farm it out to an attorney or somebody else. But it's just one of those things we can't really ignore because it's difficult. I used to do that with accounting because I hate accounting and I hate taxes. Mm-hmm. And I just at one point was like, I have to hire out for this because I don't really understand it fully. And those people are going to handle it because they're experts.
And so the next one is contracts. Always get it in writing.
Yes. I always prefer to go with getting it in writing, even if it maybe doesn't have to be. But that's just because I've seen some stuff go wrong. And I'm usually the person people run to when they're like, I don't have a contract. How do I fix this? Thinking about the relationships that you have with people that you're working with in your business, people that you're bringing in to help you, anyone that is not you as a business owner, you need to probably have something in writing with them because there's a legal relationship there that we want to protect. Things like payments, who's getting paid, intellectual property. Are you sharing, your trademarks or copyrights with these people? They shouldn't be taking them. What confidential information are you potentially sharing with these people? It's really about just, putting in writing and dictating what the relationship is so that you can protect it if there's an issue later on with somebody like stealing something or somebody, having a payment dispute. It's just good to kind of have a paper trail of all that.
And so sometimes, for example, maybe some people just want to be old school, or maybe just some people want to believe in the goodwill of other people. And they just say, we kind of agreed on this and we'll just move forward without putting it in writing, right? Or sometimes for me, what has happened has been different than a contract. But for example, on a salary negotiation, I negotiated a work from home day, and then maybe I forgot to put it in writing think that something like that happened to me on my first job, right? In which like we talked about it, but it was never written down. It wasn't obviously part of the contract. And so when I went back to ask for it, they said, oh, well, do you have any proof, right? Like, do you have anything in writing? And so I've learned why it's important, but then how do I navigate that awkward situation where people just expect to trust you? And you're like, well, for me now, it's like, well, I do want to trust you, but I also want to have it in writing just in case something happens.
Yeah. I think it is a little uncomfortable and awkward to utilize contracts or ask people to sign them when you're not used to doing it. But once you realize that it's very normal, most people are expecting something in writing. It's just, I hate to say like practice makes perfect, but if you want especially as a business owner, or if you're in a corporate type setting, all those people are using contracts and they're putting things in writing, and it might not be something that we're familiar with, but it's normal to that world. So once you've been in it, you see it and you're like, okay, I'm used to this. But you have to just, advocate for yourself and be like, look, I'm going to put this in writing and I'm going to trust that like, this is a normal thing. I know there are some like backdoor handshake deals that happen, but those are also, those could put you at really high risk of losing like lots of money at some point. So, I think it's kind of as the practice makes perfect thing, like practicing like how to use them. And then once you see like they go back frequently. And if you really are, wanting your business to be successful and like play at the level that, you're hoping to get to, everybody at that level is using contracts. They're putting things in writing. So it's just about understanding like that's a necessary thing that we have to just start doing.
Yeah. And so sometimes emails and things like that, they're no contracts, but you could find some protection from having something written in an email and saying, this is what I agree to.
It depends if it could, if pieced together, it looks like a contract. For the most part, it's really difficult to do that. And if you take emails to an attorney, you're probably going to have to pay more just to have that attorney sift through it than you would to just had put the contract in place to begin with. So emails can be used if we can piece together some things, but there's parts of a contract that we have to see. Like I have to see a promise in exchange for something, and I have to see both parties agree. Usually it's best to get that on, one contract or one piece of paper. So I don't want to say that they never can be a contract, but it becomes much, much harder to prove that it's a contract. Sometimes they work if you're like, hey, you promised to pay me this, and you really push back on the person and they're like, okay, fine. It's better to have that than nothing. So if you're going with like a verbal agreement versus email, I'd much prefer to see something in email.
Okay. But just get a contract. Yeah. I was going to say, it's kind of awkward, but I'll get better at it too.
Yeah. Sometimes I still get kind of awkward, especially if I know that the person I'm asking to sign it probably doesn't use them very frequently, or if it's like a new type of like relationship I'm forming with someone and I'm like, hey, can you sign this? And they probably are like, oh my God, this lawyer is asking me to sign a contract. So I even feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, but it's just a method of communication in writing. So if everybody understands, hopefully, like what everyone's exchanging, they're actually supposed to help. They're not supposed to be like this big scary thing unless, the other party is having you sign something that's unfair.
Yeah. I think another thing that I say, it's going to sound silly, but I don't know if you watched the documentary on Netflix on Walter Mercado.
Yeah.
And it was really sad because he lost so much money because somewhere in the contract it said like in perpetuity or something like that, and it just really screwed him up.
Yeah, he lost the rights to his own name. And that is, I am assuming based on how the documentary was portrayed that they were taking advantage of his situation, and it sounded like the attorney didn't really tell him what was in there. And, there's also a huge level of like ethically, if we know that somebody is not fluent in a certain language, like we have to take that into account too. So if just getting comfortable with contracts and kind of understanding basic things, like having basic level intellectual property knowledge, that might have helped him if he like skimmed through the contract of like, who's owning my name? So, and also just reading stuff like you'd be surprised with how many people just don't even read a contract. And then I read through it and I'm like, hey, this is not good. Like, I don't know if you meant to agree to this, but this is not good. But yeah, just, I know they're boring and they're long, but
I at least learned that from novelas. They're like they always screwed people up because they sign things when. So every time I'm like, no, let me just read this, please.
Yeah.
Great. So now we're going to go to the fun part of the podcast, right? And so imagine a friend of yours comes to visit you in your city and they want to see you and they want you to show them around, but unfortunately you're not there. And so you would just recommend things for them to do. So what are your top 3 recommendations to do and see in your city?
Top 3. I would say a Dodger game. If they're sports fans, a Dodger Stadium is just really beautiful, and there's like palm trees in the background. If you get the sunset just right, it's really, really pretty, and the atmosphere is really cool. And then also just getting somewhere to the beach if you can. There's a lot of really super crowded beaches like in Santa Monica and in Venice, but closer to where I'm at in the South Bay, they are less crowded and they're a little bit more calm. So anywhere in kind of in the South Bay area to a beach, I would say is a great spot. And then also just, I mean, I have a couple favorite Mexican food spots, but like Mexican food here is a must.
What's your favorite place or one of them?
I really love, there's different types of Mexican food. There's a place called Casa Playa kind of near me. It's just like your traditional Mexican food. And then there's Oaxacan style. Madre is the name of the restaurant. There's one in Torrance and then there's one, I think, in like West Hollywood. But I really like their food too. It's good.
Great. Yeah. I mean, in Mexico City, I think is the first time I ever had authentic Mexican food because everything in Texas is Tex-Mex, right? Is not really. I didn't know the difference until we saw this quesadilla and I was like, what is that? Like, we didn't recognize it. And we asked the waiter, he's like, excuse me, sir, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's a quesadilla. And we're like, everything is so different in Texas.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Yeah. Even in like Hollywood, and we used to live in Hollywood and downtown LA, the amount of different types of Latin style food you can get is like crazy. They're all like different, like Salvadorian food. There's like Peruvian food. There's a bunch of different types of really cool Latin inspired food. That's amazing here in Los Angeles.
That's amazing. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. This was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxCan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.